when the famous and arrogant Bruce Lee proclaims to hundreds of spectators that karate can never defeat Kung Fu. He unleashes a storm he never imagined. Among the crowd, a silent man raises his gaze. Steven Seagal's, a forgotten master who never seeks a fight, but never shies away from injustice. The audience's laughter fades as Steven steps onto the mat without saying a word. The tension is palpable, like hot steel, as two philosophies clash: rigidity versus fluidity, strength versus precision. Bruce Lee believes victory is assured until he realizes he has provoked the wrong warrior. Night had fallen on Los Angeles, with a heavy humidity that made anyone who walked for more than half a minute sweat. The streets around the colossal Hansen Arena were teeming with cars, motorcycles, and people hurrying to get to the most anticipated martial arts spectacle of the year on time. Large spotlights illuminated the main entrance, creating columns of light that pierced the night mist and announced to the world that something important was about to happen. Inside the arena, the audience already filled every available seat. There were reporters, photographers, veterans of the martial arts community, celebrities, students, and curious onlookers. They had all come for one reason: Bruce Lee. His fame had spread like wildfire. His explosive style, magnetic energy, and almost supernatural skill projected him as the man destined to change martial arts forever. Many idolized him, others criticized him, but absolutely everyone wanted to see him. And Bruce knew it. The electric atmosphere seemed to follow him wherever he went, as if the air crackled with anticipation at his mere presence. Tonight, he would be the absolute star, or so he believed. Under the stage's intense lights, an announcer in a shimmering suit declared the event underway. The crowd responded with a roar that shook the Coliseum's metal structure. Bruce emerged from the artificial smoke with a palpable confidence. He wore a minimalist, stretchy black bodysuit designed to accentuate every fiber of his defined musculature. He greeted the audience with an absolutely self-assured smile as he walked to center stage with feline grace. The show began with technical demonstrations. Bruce advanced with lightning-fast movements, executing kicks and punches that left trails in the air. Each impact generated a collective gasp. But amidst the euphoria, the tone began to shift. Bruce took the microphone and spoke of fluidity, adaptability, and the need to break with the rigid forms of the past. So far, so good. But then, with a slight mocking gesture, he added that certain traditional styles no longer had a place in a real fight, that they were stuck in museums. As he uttered those words, he exaggeratedly mimicked a traditional karate stance, eliciting laughter from the younger spectators and tense glances from the veterans of the art. And then he said it plainly: karate cannot beat Kung Fu. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. The reaction was mixed. Some applauded excitedly, others shifted uncomfortably. Many knew the statement was a direct provocation to an entire community, and one of them, sitting in the shadows near the back of the stands, looked up. Steven Seagal was there. He hadn't come as a guest star or an official competitor. He wore a simple black martial arts uniform, unadorned, without insignia. His presence went unnoticed by most. But who knew him? Those who had seen his relentless and silent method of resolving conflicts knew that he didn't need lights or spectacle. He observed with an almost unnatural calm, like a patient predator. Although the audience couldn't see him, he was following every word Bruce said, every gesture, every jab at traditional styles. Not because Steven practiced karate, though he had studied it in his youth, but because he understood what it meant to despise a martial lineage in front of thousands of people, a profound lack of respect a moral failing. From his seat, Stephen crossed his arms. As Bruce explained how his style surpassed all others, Stephen analyzed his energy, his breathing, his movements, identifying strengths, but also arrogance. And one thing was clear. Bruce wasn't speaking from a place of humility, but from the pride of someone who believes he has discovered all the answers. At one point, Bruce pointed toward the audience. If there is any karate practitioner here who believes their style can match mine, let them come up with me and prove it. The crowd fell silent. Some exchanged glances. No one came up, and Bruce smiled as if he had anticipated it. But then something shifted in the air. From the back, as if emerging from a dark well, a man stood up. His silhouette was broad, imposing, disciplined. He walked unhurriedly through the rows, without needing to announce himself or raise his voice. As he advanced, people instinctively made way for him, without knowing why, as if some primal instinct alerted them to his presence. Bruce frowned, unable to recognize him in the distance due to the lighting. The man approached the edge of the stage. He stepped up with the serenity of a monk, but with the physical build of someone who had dedicated his entire life to real combat. When he finally stepped into the light, the murmur of the audience grew louder. It's Steven Seagal's. Bruce, surprised, raised his eyebrows. He hadn't expected that. He hadn't expected someone like him to appear uninvited. Do you practice karate? Bruce asked challengingly. Steven's answer was brief, grave, and forceful, like an invisible hammer blow. I practice truth. If you don't want to miss our content, hit the like button and subscribe below. Also, turn on notifications and tell us where you're listening from. We appreciate your support. Night had fallen on Los Angeles, like a heavy, damp blanket, laden with neons and broken promises. For most, it was a city that never slept. For Steven Seagal's, it was a living, training ground. After what had happened at the pier, where Bruce Lee had uttered his arrogant phrase, "Karate can't beat Kung Fu," in front of everyone, Steven knew the conflict wasn't over. Rumors spread fast, almost as fast as a master's blows. And in alleyways, underground gyms, and bars filled with smoke and forgotten eyes, a single question echoed wildly. Who was going to prove they were right? Steven wasn't looking to prove anything. That was the problem. He didn't live for ego or applause. He lived for balance, fairness, and precision. But Bruce, inflamed by his own myth, by his loyal fans, by the young people who idolized him, had decided to turn the difference in styles into a personal challenge. One that, even if Steven hadn't accepted, was already written in the air. That night, Steven was training alone in an abandoned warehouse he converted into a dojo when he needed silence. The shadows of the hanging sandbags moved like imaginary warriors as he flowed among them with calm, almost meditative. His black kimono seemed to absorb the dim light, and his breathing was so deep and steady it could almost be mistaken for the rhythm of the wind. He knew Bruce was provoking him, and he understood. Someone with such explosive talent and such a defined philosophy couldn't accept the existence of a rival who matched him in presence, composure, and mysterious mastery. Bruce had spent his life evolving, breaking molds, tearing down barriers. Watching Steven move with that dangerous calm awakened an ancient fire in him, a need to test, to dominate, to prove himself. But that wasn't Steven's way. As he made a circular motion with his hands, feeling the air brush against his fingers as if it were an extension of his own energy, he heard footsteps outside, quick, tense, determined. Someone was in a hurry or worried. The metal door burst open. "Steven?" a familiar voice called. It was Marco, one of the young men who used to train at the community gym where Stephen taught self-defense techniques. An impulsive boy with a noble heart and a fiery temper. Stephen didn't startle. He simply turned. The boy calmly lowered his head. Marco said in a serene voice, "What's wrong?" The boy gasped, his hands on his knees. "It's Bruce. Bruce Lee is in the East District. They say he's giving a public demonstration, but it's not a normal demonstration. He's talking about you." Stephen sighed very softly, as if he'd foreseen it. What did Marco say? He swallowed. "He says you're living proof that karate is still clinging to the past. He says your techniques are rigid, obsolete, that anyone who wants to see the true essence of real combat should see him." And he paused uncomfortably. He also said that if you don't show up tonight, everyone will understand why. Stephen closed his eyes, not out of annoyance, but out of patience. He felt the energy around him like a lake before a storm. He knew that if he didn't go, Bruce would keep stoking the fire. And he knew that fire wouldn't just affect him, but the young people who sought his guidance, the humble fighters who respected him, the entire community that saw him as a beacon amidst urban violence. With impeccable calm, he took his black belt from the mat, tied it around his waist, and walked toward the exit. "Come on, Marco," he said. "But remember one thing. I'm not fighting out of pride." The boy nodded, though he didn't quite understand. "Then why are you going?" Stephen paused for a second, looking the boy straight in the eye. Because when someone powerful uses their voice to humiliate instead of teach, someone has to provide balance. The East District was alive with shouts, lights, and cameras. A huge crowd surrounded a makeshift stage in front of a small cultural center. There, in the center, with his undeniable charisma and impeccable posture, Bruce Lee performed kung fu moves that left the audience mesmerized. His strikes were swift, precise, elegant. His short shouts resonated powerfully. Each kick whistled through the air like a sharp blade. But between each demonstration came the dangerous part, the words. "It's not about strength," Bruce said, pacing the stage. "It's about fluidity. Water always overcomes rock. And what do some ancient styles represent? Rigidity, firmness, straight lines. And that's not how you win a real fight." The people nodded. Some applauded. "Karate," Bruce added. "That's it. Rigid, predictable, and you know who their representative is these days." There was laughter, some nervous. Then the lights flickered. The murmuring stopped. The crowd turned their heads as they sensed a presence entering the event's perimeter. Steven Seagal walked forward with calm steps. His black kimono gleamed in the lights as if absorbing their intensity. His expression was neutral, unperturbed. But his energy filled the space, displacing the noise, the tension, the very air. Bruce smiled. "Wow," he said. "I thought you weren't coming." Stephen stepped onto the platform, unhurriedly. "I didn't come to compete with you, Bruce," he replied in a deep voice. "I came because your words are leading astray those who admire you." Bruce tilted his head like a tiger, eyeing another predator. "Then show them," he said with a defiant gleam in his eyes, "that karate can flow, if it can." The crowd held its breath. Flashes ignited like furious stars. Stephen breathed slowly, very slowly. His body seemed relaxed, almost limp, but his center, his balance, was unshakable. "Fighting isn't about humiliation," he said. "It's about revelation." Bruce stepped forward with a dangerous smile. "Then let's reveal ourselves, Stephen." The platform vibrated with tension. The crowd roared, and a hush hung in the air. The first spark before the storm. The platform felt like an altar where two ancient philosophies were about to collide. It wasn't just a duel between two men. It was a clash of worldviews, between moving water and silent rock. The crowd remained in a subdued murmur, as if a single, uncontrolled noise could unleash a catastrophe. In the center, Steven Seagal stood motionless, breathing like a monk. Facing him, Bruce Lee smiled with a mixture of confidence, defiance, and an almost childlike gleam of excitement. There were no referees, no judges, no rules, only the unspoken respect between two masters and the electric tension that emanated from the night. Bruce Lee stepped forward. "Ready to show the world if karate can adapt?" Steven asked in a soft but purposeful tone. Steven bowed his head slightly, showing neither pride nor anger. "Bruce, don't mistake calmness for weakness." His voice was so serene that the crowd had to strain to hear. "I didn't come to defeat you. I came to correct your path. The true master doesn't need to humiliate to teach." Bruce's smile widened. "Then teach me," he whispered. The air tightened, and in the blink of an eye, Bruce Lee launched himself. His initial attack was a blast, a straight punch followed by an explosive hip twist that flowed into a whip-fast roundhouse kick. The crowd roared at the ferocious elegance of Kung Fu in action, but Steven didn't move, only tilting his torso a few millimeters. The kick grazed his black GI. The precision of his evasion was so exact, it seemed choreographed. Bruce landed in surprise. Steven hadn't blocked, hadn't countered, he had only observed. Bruce pursed his lips. "That's it, Steven. Avoiding. That's not karate." Steven responded with a small gesture. "Karate is control." Bruce attacked again. This time he descended low with a swift sweep meant to drop any rigid guard. Camera flashes illuminated every movement, every shadow. The crowd held its breath. Steven lifted a foot and allowed the sweep to pass underneath without losing his balance. His hands remained relaxed at the sides. It was a minimal dance, an absolute denial of conflict. Bruce Lee, frustrated, changed his strategy. He advanced with a flurry of chain punches, quick as hammer blows, followed by a short jump and a kick to the chest. Steven, without apparent effort, he raised his left arm and deflected the attack with a circular motion that seemed too smooth to be real. The kick was absorbed, redirected, and neutralized. The people closest to the platform exchanged glances. Some murmured, others shook their heads. One spectator blurted out, "Did you see that?" He didn't even touch him, but Bruce lost his balance. Bruce Lee took a step back. His breathing was still controlled, but his eyes shone with a mixture of respect and obstinacy. "Interesting," he said with a crooked smile. "But dodging doesn't prove anything." Then Steven spoke with the calm of an ocean before a storm. "I'm showing you that your fury has nowhere to strike, Bruce. When you run out of her, that's when the real fight begins." Those words ignited something inside Bruce. He launched himself again, but this time it wasn't a direct attack. It was a complex sequence, a constant flow of interconnected movements, fists, elbows, knees, spinning kicks, a perfect whirlwind of Kung Fu. It was beautiful. It was savage. It was Bruce Lee at his finest, and Steven flowed. Not like Bruce's water, but like gravity. Every missed strike seemed to fall into a void. Every kick was redirected with the minimum force necessary. There was no shock, no harshness, no sound. It was as if Steven was guiding Bruce's attack, not blocking it, as if he knew it before it happened. The crowd began to sense it. It wasn't a fight, it was a lesson. Bruce gave a yell and launched his final attack. A leap, a downward spinning kick, a technique that had knocked out expert fighters. The crowd roared, Stephen took a step forward. Just one step. Bruce descended, and Stephen placed his open hand exactly on the point where the leg was going to impact. He didn't block, he didn't strike, he just placed his hand. Bruce's leg stopped. It stopped as if it had collided with an invisible mountain. Silence erupted. Bruce fell to his feet, bewildered. He looked at Stephen as if he were seeing him for the first time. His breathing was faster. Sweat trickled down his forehead, and the Kung Fu master understood what had happened. Stephen had anticipated it, absorbed it, and dismantled it, without breaking a single rhythm of his breath. "How?" Bruce whispered, placing a hand on his knee. Stephen took a step back and assumed a simple, humble stance. "Karate isn't rigidity, Bruce. It isn't brute force, it's structure, it's intention. It's listening to the other person's body before it decides to move. What you call inflexible, I call unyielding." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Some applauded, others were speechless. Bruce watched him with a mixture of admiration, frustration, and a wounded pride he tried not to show. "I'm not finished," Bruce said, though his voice trembled slightly. Stephen looked at him with a serenity that held no trace of mockery. "I know. Because what you're fighting for now isn't me, it's your ego." Bruce clenched his fists. The crowd felt the tension rise again. But in that instant, before Bruce could attack again, something unexpected happened. A group of motorcycles burst onto the street. Roaring engines, flashing lights, chains, bats, black jackets. A gang known in the area, the Crimson Wolves. The leader, a man tattooed from head to toe, shouted, "Get off that platform. This street is ours, and today we're collecting a toll." Bruce and Stephen turned at the same time. The crowd recoiled in terror. The gang members surrounded the platform, ready to tear everything down. And then, for the first time all night, Bruce Lee looked at Steven Seagal's not as a rival, but as a necessary ally. "Pause?" Bruce asked with a half-smile. Stephen took a deep breath. "Pause." He nodded. The two masters stepped down from the platform together. The real battle was about to begin. The roar of motorcycles echoed like metallic thunder in the East District. Headlights pierced the smoke, the shouts of the crowd mingled with the roar of the engines, and the tension that minutes before had been merely philosophical now became a palpable threat. The Crimson Wolves gang members, armed with chains, pipes, and machetes, advanced with exaggerated strides and cruel smiles. The makeshift platform had become a scene of urban warfare. Steven Seagal remained perfectly still, observing every movement as if analyzing an invisible current. Beside him, Bruce Lee let out a long sigh, part frustration, part excitement. It was strange to see two masters who just moments before had been on the verge of clashing, now united by necessity. "Well," Bruce said, stretching his wrists, "I guess fate wants us to settle our debate after this." Stephen didn't take his eyes off the gang members. "It's not fate," he replied. "It's consequence. The streets sense when leaders are distracted." Bruce smirked, always so philosophical. Stephen, the gang leader, a huge fellow known as Crimson Bull, advanced like a ravenous animal. Half his face was tattooed with wolf fangs, and he had a thick chain wrapped around his arm. "You two," he growled, pointing toward the platform. "This isn't a show anymore. Today you'll pay the price. Nobody puts on a show on my street without permission." Some gang members banged pipes against the pavement, creating a menacing rhythm. The crowd retreated further, seeking refuge behind cars and food stalls. Bruce Lee stepped forward. "Listen, buddy," he said calmly. "Maybe you didn't pick the best day for Crimson Bull." Crimson Bull didn't let him finish. He swung his chain at Bruce with brutal force. The move would have caught any average wrestler, but not a kung fu master. Bruce spun back with an elegant pirouette, dodging the chain by inches and dropping into a low stance. Stephen didn't even blink. "I guess that means they don't want to talk," he muttered. The Crimson Wolves charged, and chaos erupted. The first to arrive were 3 gang members with metal pipes. They attacked Steven Seagal simultaneously, one for the legs, one for the ribs, one for the head. Anyone else would have had to block any of them. But Stephen sensed. His movements were subtle. He shifted his weight millimeter precisely to the left, letting the pipe aimed for his ribs pass without touching him. He lowered his center of gravity and slid forward, causing the blow meant for his head to hit thin air. Then, with a circular flick of his wrist, he barely grazed the arm of the attacker coming from his right. The man flew off as if he'd been electrocuted. Bruce Lee, on the other hand, was pure fire. He spun around with short, explosive kicks, hitting one gang member, then another, using their own bodies as momentum to move to the next. His movements were so quick, the spectators could barely follow. "Come on, Stephen," Bruce yelled as he threw a punch that knocked 2 rivals down at once. He admits this is more fun than debating styles. Stephen caught a chain in midair with 2 fingers and gently deflected it, causing the chain's owner to stumble and fall on top of 3 more gang members. "I don't confuse fun with chaos," another huge gang member with a rusty machete retorted, lunging at Stephen with a yell. The steel flashed in the neon's light. The crowd screamed, but Stephen took a step forward and placed his open palm on the attacker's forearm. The machete fell to the ground. The man dropped to his knees. Bruce, who had just taken a guy down with a spinning kick, watched the scene and whistled. "That was impressive. That was balance," Stephen corrected. Crimson Bull roared furiously. No more games. He leapt from the motorcycle like a runaway bull, chain in hand, straight for Bruce. The impact would have been devastating, but Bruce dropped back in one fluid motion, using the bull's own momentum to lift him high with an upward kick. The gigantic gang member crashed onto a table, shattering it like paper. But he got up and this time charged straight for Stephen. The downward slam of the chain had the force of a jackhammer. The crowd screamed, the air vibrated. Stephen raised one hand, just one, and caught the chain. The metallic echo sounded like thunder. Crimson Bull pulled with all his might. Stephen didn't even flinch. It was as if he were rooted to the ground. Bruce muttered, "Oh, God." Stephen twisted his wrist gently. The enormous bull shot off, rolling across the ground and crashing into a motorcycle. Silence. Absolute silence. The gang members stopped. Some backed away. Others exchanged doubtful glances. Bruce Lee stood alongside Stephen, his breathing a little more ragged than his. "Well," Stephen said, "I guess it's time for them to do what wolves do when they encounter a bigger predator." Stephen understood. "They run," he replied. And the Crimson Wolves ran. Seeing their leader knocked out and more than a dozen companions on the ground, they mounted their motorcycles and sped off in the opposite direction, leaving only the echo of engines and the tension evaporating in the air. The crowd began to applaud, first timidly, then loudly. It was a roar of relief, of amazement, of gratitude. Bruce Lee raised his arms in a salute as if he had just performed in a show. Well, you see who has the better fighting style, right?" he joked. Stephen looked at him with a calmness that cut through arrogance like a knife. Bruce said serenely, "They didn't run because of your style. They ran away because they understood something you still don't." Bruce lowered his arms, confused. And what were they supposed to understand? Stephen looked him in the eye. That, in a real fight, the form doesn't matter. The purpose does. And you still fight to prove who you are. I fight to protect those who can't. Bruce fell silent, and for the first time, he seemed genuinely willing to listen. As paramedics tended to the wounded and the crowd began to disperse, Bruce approached Stephen. There was no more mockery, no pride, no competitive fire in his gaze, only a sincere question. Stephen, will you teach me? Stephen took a deep, calm breath. I can show you the way, he replied, but walking it is up to you. Bruce nodded, and then a dark shadow appeared at the end of the street. A hooded man watched from a distance. Stephen noticed him and knew that this presence was no coincidence. The night wasn't over yet. The night had regained its silence, but it was a fragile, unsettling silence, as if the city were holding its breath. As the last of the onlookers dispersed, Stephen Seagal kept his gaze fixed on the dark end of the street where the mysterious hooded figure had been observing. No one else had noticed. Only him. Only someone with his level of sensitivity, discipline, and perception could discern such a restrained presence amidst the chaos. Bruce Lee, still catching his breath after the fight, cautiously approached Stephen. What do you see? He asked, his tone more humble than any he had used that night. Stephen took a few seconds to answer. Someone who didn't come to look, came to measure. Bruce frowned. Measure me or measure you? Stephen lowered his gaze slightly, still watching out of the corner of his eye, the spot where the figure had vanished. Both of us, he replied, but mostly you. Bruce felt a chill, though he tried to mask it with a smile. Why me? Because your name still echoes in places where strength is bought and loyalty is broken, Stephen said. Because your fame attracts followers and enemies. Bruce crossed his arms uncomfortably. For the first time, arrogance wasn't there to protect him. Stephen, who was that guy? Stephen inhaled deeply. I don't know, but I know how he moved, and none of the Crimson Wolves fought like that. Paramedics walked past them. Police officers took statements. The street was breathing again, but Stephen knew the real threat hadn't yet begun. Hours later, back in the small dojo where Stephen Seagal spent most of his time, the silence was so profound you could hear the wood creak with every breath. Bruce Lee had insisted on coming with him. He said he wanted to train, learn, improve, but Stephen knew he was really looking for answers. Stephen stood in the center of the mat, eyes closed, moving his hands slowly, drawing invisible circles in the air. Bruce watched him with his arms crossed. I always thought karate was more direct, Bruce remarked. He made a sharp, forceful gesture. You know, rigid, forceful. Stephen's eyes widened. Because you see it from the outside. From the inside, it's something else. It's structure without tension, firmness without violence. You don't need to be rigid to be strong. Bruce pondered this for a moment. And that's why you could sense the hooded guy. Stephen nodded. Force without purpose is noisy. Force with intention is camouflaged. Bruce swallowed. So that guy had intentions? Yes, Stephen replied. And they weren't good. Suddenly, a loud bang shook the dojo door. A sharp, determined bang. Bruce jumped back. Are you expecting someone? He asked. I never wait for anyone, Stephen replied. The doorbell rang again, this time louder. For a moment, neither of them spoke, until Stephen, with absolute calm, walked to the entrance. He opened the door with an unsettling serenity. Behind him stood 3 men dressed in black. Not gang members, not street kids, not amateurs. They moved their bodies with a martial discipline so polished that even Bruce Lee took a step back. The one in the middle, a man with a prominent beard and cold eyes, spoke in a low voice. "Steven Seagals, our master wishes to see you." Steven narrowed his eyes. "And who is his master?" The man didn't smile. Who disciplined Bruce Lee before he became famous? Bruce's eyes widened. "No, it can't be." The man looked at him with contempt. "He trained you, molded you, and you betrayed him by abandoning his school and publicly humiliating him with your cheap theories about liberating the body." Bruce felt a punch in his gut. Not physical, but emotional. "That man is dead," Bruce whispered. The emissary shook his head. "No. Bruce is very much alive and wants to finish what you left unfinished." Steven stepped forward. "What you mean?" he interjected. "He wants revenge." The three men tensed as if Steven had read their souls. The emissary took a deep breath. "Our master wants Bruce to return, to submit, to show humility." "Bruce is free," Steven said firmly. "Not in our world," the man replied. "And if he doesn't accept, there will be consequences." Steven bowed his head. "Consequences for him?" The man smiled coldly. "For everyone around him." Bruce felt an icy sweat trickle down his back. "Steven," he muttered, "you're not joking." Steven took an inch forward, barely an inch. But the three men all took a step back at the same time, as if a gigantic animal had bared its teeth. "Tell your master," Steven said with a calmness so dangerous it made the air tense, "that if he wants to speak with me, he must come himself. I will accept neither emissaries nor threats." The man in the center clenched his jaw. "You'll regret this," Steven replied without changing his expression. "You won't regret this." The men stepped back and disappeared into the darkness like shadows carried by the wind. Bruce sat on the tatami, breathing deeply. He was pale, as if he had seen a ghost. "Steven, my old master, is not someone I can simply ignore. He created the style that made me famous. He trained fighters who died in actual combat. He doesn't fight for sport. He doesn't fight for honor." "Why does he fight then?" Steven asked. Bruce looked at him gravely. "He fights to prove that his philosophy is absolute, that everything else is inferior." Steven nodded slowly. "So he's just like you were at the beginning." Bruce accepted this without arguing. "Yes, I suppose so." "The difference," Steven added, "is that you can change. He may not." Bruce swallowed. "He's going to come after you, Steven. You too. He doesn't tolerate anyone humiliating his disciples. And you today, you humiliated me without even touching me." Steven walked toward the window. Outside, the night seemed to hold a new danger. Deeper, more intimate. "Let him come," he said. "If he wants to measure the path, I'll be here." Bruce closed his eyes. "No, Steven, he won't want to measure the path. He'll want to destroy it." Steven didn't answer because he knew, and because somewhere in the city's shadows, the hooded figure was already watching them again. The war had only just begun. The first light of dawn filtered through the broken windows of the ancient temple, illuminating the dust motes in the air like tiny golden fragments floating in a reverential silence. The previous night had left scars on the floor. Split planks, cracked columns, and deep marks from the battle between two philosophies. Two worlds, two giants. There, in the center of the chaos, Steven Seagals sat cross-legged, breathing with absolute serenity as his shadow slowly lengthened across the stones. Bruce Lee awoke with a low groan. He could still feel the echo of the blocks, the deflections, the fluid power he had faced. He tried to rise with dignity, but the pain reminded him of every mistake. Seeing Steven Seagal's motionless, as if nothing had happened, his pride shriveled. He wasn't used to losing, much less losing so decisively. "Yesterday," Bruce Lee murmured, wiping a trace of blood from his lip. "Yesterday I fought a man. I fought a river." Steven Seagal opened his eyes calmly, without triumph. His voice was soft, but as firm as a well-tempered sword. "There are no superior styles, Bruce. Only higher levels of consciousness." Bruce gritted his teeth. His hands trembled. He didn't want to hear philosophy. He wanted a reason, a technical explanation that justified his defeat. But what he found in Steven Seagal's eyes was not arrogance, nor mockery, nor pride. It was understanding. "I don't understand," Bruce Lee said, taking an awkward step toward him. "Kung Fu flows, adapts, surrounds. How could karate defeat it?" Steven stood with an almost ritualistic slowness. His movements held no aggression, only depth. He pointed to one of the broken columns. "Water flows," he replied, "but it is also capable of breaking mountains over time. The karate you know is rigidity. The karate I practice is balance." Bruce Lee remained silent. That phrase wasn't a proclaimed victory, it was a bridge built. Then Steven Seagal did something unexpected. He bowed respectfully before him. Bruce Lee was taken aback, unsure whether to respond as a teacher, a rival, or a student. "Thank you for the lesson," Steven said. "You forced me to give my best." The words pierced Bruce Lee's pride like a sure arrow. No one had ever thanked him for fighting. No one had ever seen him as a catalyst, as a necessary mirror. For years he had presented himself as the defender of Kung Fu, as a living symbol. But now he understood that he too was trapped in his own idea. In a rigid identity he had mistaken for invincibility. "It deeply inspired me," Steven Seagal said solemnly. "You are a true warrior, and that transcends any style." The ensuing silence was more revealing than any dialogue. There, among the temple ruins, they both knew that something had ended and something new had begun. But the story still had one last twist. As they prepared to leave the temple, a thin, elderly figure emerged from the shadows. He was the caretaker of the place, a man with a face wrinkled by years and a bright gaze. He walked slowly toward them with a carved cane. "I have watched your fight," the old man said, "and I have seen the birth of a lost principle." Bruce Lee lowered his head in respect. "What do you mean, master?" The old man smiled at the combat without hatred, the strength without ego, the technique without rivalry. "They have brought balance where before there was only comparison." Both men remained silent. The old man placed his hand on Steven Seagal's shoulder. "You didn't come to defeat Kung Fu," he said. "You came to remind us that the true enemy is arrogance." Then he looked at Bruce Lee. "And you weren't defeated. You were liberated." The words hung in the air like bells ringing in a monastery. Bruce Lee closed his eyes for a moment and breathed a sigh that wasn't one of resignation, but of relief. Finally, Steven spoke. "If you ever want to train with me, you're welcome." Bruce Lee smiled for the first time since they had met. "And if you ever want to understand the flow of the dragon, I will teach you." They shook hands, not like opposing masters, but like brothers on a common path, the path of growth. Dawn finished entering the temple, illuminating their figures as they walked toward the exit. The ruins were left behind, but not as a place of destruction, but as the stage where two spirits had evolved. And so, on the summit of that silent mountain, Steven Seagal's and Bruce Lee left behind the shadow of conflict to become a living symbol. The balance between strength and fluidity, between firmness and adaptability, between karate and kung fu. A symbol that would eventually become a legend. M.A. symbol that would eventually become a legend. M.A. symbol that would eventually become a legend.